it's interesting you mentioned that previous panel we had with the new National Armaments Director. One of the questions I asked them was, culturally, the direction in the MOD, is it to prepare for some kind of future conflict that might happen in the 30s, as in 2035, which is one of the dates where we've currently committed to hit certain funding categories, which is it's so far away that it's, you know, policy can change so much between now and then. Or is it to get ready to fight and win in the next couple of years? If Russia's fixed in Ukraine at the moment, if there is a ceasefire this year and discussions for deals are well underway now, then it might shift its gaze and we might be drawn into conflict, and suddenly conversations about spending X, Y, Z in 2035 seem a bit far-fetched, or rather irrelevant. I asked them, and they told me, ask CDS when he comes to me. So that's what they said on record. This is what I said.
I read it.
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
So perhaps slightly obvious answer is you have to do both. So I talk about being ready to fight today and tomorrow and together. The today bit is about how do we maximise the output that we can get from the kit we've got today, and that's about investing in spares, it's about investing in activity, and at the same time we also have to recognise that our enemy is changing, is adapting, and we need to be able to keep up with that. So you have to kind of do both. What the defence reform does, partly to Mr Bailey's point, is it provides much greater clarity over the problem statement coming from the military, and much greater delegation to the National Armament Director to go to industry to work out how best to solve that. And if that works, what that delivers is a faster response to specific problems we face. And we've got good examples of where we did this. If you think about the counter IED fight in Afghanistan, when Mr Joppa and I worked together previously, actually we did that remarkably well. And it was because we had a very clear threat and a very clear requirement to do better. And that's the culture that we've got to bring in. But I'll be honest with you, it is difficult. If you take somebody like me, I've spent 30 plus years in the armed forces, and we've been doing it the same way that whole time. To shift that mindset requires real clarity over the requirement, the threat, and then delegating and empowering our people to do those things. And when things go wrong, because they might do if you take more risk, is we acknowledge they've gone wrong and we say it was in the greater good, and I may be using that defence in front of the committee at some point.
Well, you're welcome to. You would be welcome to in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe Lincoln Jopp wanted to come in on this point as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I think we probably had a pretty similar briefing when the committee went to Ukraine, and what was so telling was the way in which they had completely bypassed a load of stuff in order to get the responsiveness to the ever-evolving threat. And if we looked at what they had cut out, and they'd effectively cut out the whole of the military chain of command above brigade level, they'd cut out the whole of the Ministry of Defence, and they'd cut out every single regulator. Now, if you want the responsiveness that you're talking about, institutions get the behaviours they reward. And you just said, you spent 30 years in the armed forces doing it in one way, which you've now acknowledged should be wrong. But the institutions get the behaviours that they reward, and they rewarded you with becoming CDS. And so how are you going to meet this challenge? But you've grown up and been successful in a system that you now have to say, we completely need to change that wholesale, and I'm the man to lead it.
So I think the point I'm trying to make is that that is a part of the acquisition system, which under the new model is the National Armament Director. What I can do as the head of the armed forces in this new model is be super clear about what the specific problem statements and requirements are, and be prepared to accept that we won't, in this new model, drive towards precise requirements 20 years in the future, but instead focus on what are we going to be able to deliver this year, next year, or this week, next week, and the week after. And that's the model that defence reform is trying to bring into place. What that will require is changes in regulation, changes in process, and it will require us to accept failure when it occurs, and to acknowledge that was in pursuit of the greater good. And what gives me some confidence around this is that when we look at those circumstances where we have had that very clear requirement, we have swept away some of that process. We've swept away some of that regulation that has accreted and built up over 25, 30 years of the peace dividend. And I'm not in any way pretending that is easy, and I'm not in any way pretending that we can be complacent and it will naturally just happen. But I think we've seen the importance of it in Ukraine, and we've seen an example of how it can be done in Ukraine. And let's be honest, the Ukrainian system is not without its flaws or problems as well. And right now we're not at war, and that the challenge is how do we create that sense of urgency without creating this sense of panic and throwing all of the regulations that are established by this place out of the window, and that will be a consistent effort to carve that away over time.
Thank you. The defence world tends to not be great at conveying simple and straightforward messages to the public. You've spoken about having a national conversation about the risks that we face. Obviously, people in this room are aware of those risks, but how are you going to reach out to the wider population, have that national conversation?
Yeah. So I think armed forces and leaders in the armed forces particularly, but also right through our ranks, have a role to play in that. As I set out in my recent speech, the challenge is how do you have a conversation about a complex threat that sits within a wider geopolitical and geostrategic context that is uncertain and challenging. Because the danger is you fall back on simple tropes that Russia's going to invade by 27, or they're not going to invade by till 2035. And the reality is, it's actually a matter of a judgment around the level of risk that we face. My core argument is that what we are seeing is an increasing risk as our adversary in Russia particularly becomes more capable, more battle-hardened, and we see a continued desire to undermine NATO and the stability of the West and the rules-based international system. And we should have those kind of debates in public. I think the polity have a critical role to play in that, and we can support that because of our understanding of the threats. But the role that our reserves play, the role our cadets play, the role that our regular services play in talking about what the armed forces do, I think is an important part of that national conversation.
I mean, just even listening to you there, CDS, if I was someone watching this and trying to understand what the risks are, I would have been lost off. Do you know, just the average person on the street, if we're going to try and get them to understand what the risk is, don't we need to be a bit more blunt and slightly more alarmist with them so that they understand it? Because like you said, people are living in a cosy bubble of the peace dividend, and actually that's not where we're at anymore. But I think every single time I hear anybody in defence talking about it, I think the average person will be lost off within 5 seconds and just get on with their day. It's about making sure that they actually understand, and I don't think the public are there yet. And if the public aren't there yet, then how are we going to get them to be resilient?
I think it's a really fair challenge, and you as politicians, it's your job to communicate with society. My worry about being too blunt is that we scaremonger. My worry about being too relaxed is we're too complacent, and the reality is it's more complicated than that. And I would be happy to take advice from politicians on how to do that in an effective way. But I think if we are too alarmist, that is unnecessary. But equally, we can't be complacent either.
I mean, you'll be aware, CDS, that other countries, so I'm just looking at Norway and Finland have had military conscription for decades. I've got friends in Finland, and they'll talk quite openly about how, you know, they're always ready. Basically, they know that that's something as a nation they have to do. The Swedish government has their total defence strategy. Other governments send out booklets to their citizens to say this is what you would do in the event of a national attack or an attack on civil critical national infrastructure. There is nothing like that. I could go out now and ask anyone and say, what would you do in the event of an attack? And there would just be mass panic. So what can we do to avert that, is I suppose what I'm saying.
I spoke recently about the Swedish model, where they have, I think it's annually, but certainly regularly, provide a booklet that goes out in Swedish, simple Swedish and English, and it talks about some of these issues. Some of it is about straightforward national resilience, so I suspect Mr Martin's constituents and the problems they had with water supply would cover off those things, but it also expands right the way out to armed attack. And it feels to me that those are the sorts of things that would be part of that wider national conversation. And they can be reassuring as well as realistic about the potential threats that we face. But it seems to me that we have to start with a description of what those things might be, admit that there's a degree of uncertainty about the likelihood of it happening, and then to use all of the means available to help educate society more broadly on what we might do. But it goes beyond straightforwardly thinking about whether you're going to store drinking water at home. It is about how do we encourage people to want to serve? How do we have the conversation with public that says we are going to spend more money on defence, and that will have consequences. And ultimately, I think that is a political discussion, but we can help support that through a description of the threats.
And I think that's one of the central dilemmas, is the public don't accept more spending on defence because they're not fully aware of what the risk is, and that's something we're always battling with as members of Parliament. And until we get something clearly out there in an understandable format to the public, they're never going to accept that. Just another quick question from myself, Chair. The Defence Readiness Bill, do you know when that will be ready?
I don't. My understanding is that it depends on finding parliamentary time for it, and I know it's a key focus for Defence Readiness and Industry, MIN-DRA, Luke Pollard and the Defence Secretary, and they're determined to try and get it in during this Parliament, but I don't have a precise date.
Do you have any part to play in advising ministers what should be in that bill?
Yes, we will do. Yes, there'll be the military staffs will have a part to play in that, and describing some of the issues that we want. And clearly, it will require specialist drafters, because we don't often do bills in defence.
What do you think should be in it?
So, a range of things, but it will be about how do we government gain access to private assets in times of crisis? How do we shift industrial capacity to particular areas of focus in times of crisis, and mirroring laws and laws and rights that other governments have in other nations. The US is an example. Okay. So elements of those will be what we would need.
Okay. Mike Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you might touch on Homeland preparedness and resilience. So, I mean, you'll know very well, NATO Article 3 mandates that we should continuously, I'm just quoting, and effectively maintain and develop our individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. And that specifically, speaks to this question of national resilience, both in a military sense and in a non-military sense as well. How would you say we're doing on that?
Not as well as I would want us to. I mean, that was really the central element of my speech at RUSI, is that we, those of us in this community, are familiar with the issues and risks, and we talk about it all the time. But it is not at the front of our minds right across the nation. And the example I gave in my RUSI speech was a report, really excellent report done by the Royal Academy of Engineering about infrastructure and about the need to rebuild infrastructure around things like flood defences, railways, etc. And I could agree with all of the elements in there, but at no point did it talk about doing it to build in resilience for the risk that we might come with armed attack or sabotage. And so we have to bring those things more to the fore. The Cabinet, following the publication of the National Security Strategy and the SDR, the Cabinet Office lead across government work to enhance these this thinking in these areas and to deliver those things. But this isn't free and isn't going to happen overnight. And I judge, and I've argued, that this, in a world where the demands on defence and the nation are rising, the risks are rising, that is a time when we should be contemplating and examining how we increase the resilience of the nation more broadly. So as we think about replacing, upgrading signalling on railways, is how do we build in the redundancy associated with that? We talked about the National Health Service earlier. How do we think about holding stockpiles or building capacity and resilience to support us in mass casualty events? And that work is really relatively new and really getting going. And I know that the team in the Cabinet Office have said that they would be very happy to come and talk to the committee about it if that were helpful.
Yeah, you're right. It's absolutely about, is that bridge built to do X under duress? And there's a mindset shift as well. So I'm an MP for a constituency that suffered repeated water outages, including a 2-week one before Christmas. And towards the end of that, we had bad actors playing in the social media space around the water quality. So actually, you're a water company, you think your job is to supply water, but all of a sudden you're dealing with malicious disinformation. And we did actually have to ask the Cabinet Office to get involved there. And I agree with you that stuff costs money, but plans are cheap. So do we have a national defence plan?
We don't have a complete national defence plan
Shouldn't
yet.
we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the government is committed to doing that.
Why don't we have one?
So I think that it is a manifestation of the peace dividend. It's one of the most obvious, is that since the end of the Cold War, we have not prioritised those matters, and so as a consequence, the government for many years has not, of many hues, has not focused its efforts on developing that kind of plan. I'm pleased to say that partly as a consequence of what's in the Strategic Defence Review, that is changing. And
when are we going to have the plan?
So I would say that you will. The complete national defence plan, that is a question for Cabinet Office.
As we're mandated to do, right? We signed a treaty.
Inside defence, which is a component of it, we have a plan called Op Arculus, which is forms the basis of our national defence plan, and we will evolve and develop that over this year, and it will be an ongoing thing. But we will have a plan that I can point to where I understand the command and control arrangements, I understand how we will transition through war through this year.
And are you aware of any other NATO countries that don't have national defence plans?
There are a number. I don't know the exact which nations, and some nations don't talk about it in public. And I think it's fair to say that nations may describe themselves as having a national defence plan, but they're of variable depth of detail across all of those different nations. Our job should be to focus on us and making sure we have the plan.
Would you say that it's sort of letting the side down to not have one?
I think, as you said yourself, NATO expects us to have a national defence plan, and that's why we need to work on it and build it.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Ian.
Right, thank you very much. Well, the time wraps here, so I'll be very quick. Air Chief Marshal, you mentioned at Russia, your speech on the 15th of December, that people are a critical role. In fact, the Rick Haythwaite also said that people are a pivotal military capability just as much as a new submarine or fast jet. You also said a pleasing thing that this committee is, when we've had General McGowan in front of us, and we've had the Secretary of State, and also General Dame Sharon Naismith come in front of this committee about the retention. And one thing shocked me, obviously, from the last reports that we heard, that we had more people exiting than actually being recruited. You said in that speech, the latest figures just a few weeks ago, which had been then beginning of January, showed that the first time in 4 years, more people joined than left the forces in the past year, which I think is a big achievement. So coming on to the wider broadness of the question is, can you give the committee an update on the Haythwaite, the Haythornworth review and your assessment of where the armed forces are in relation to recruitment and retention, because I do know that we've had briefings about the pinch points and those also where we've had to have given bonuses, which at the time one of our questions was, is this just sticking plasters? Because, you know, particularly around your trade, which engineering.
I mean, on the macro points, up to the 1st of October 25, which is the last time we had up-to-date data, more people had joined in the previous 12 months than had left. We've seen increases in those recruited. The Air Force was up to 37%. I think the Navy was about 24% increases in numbers of recruits. And we've seen a reduction in the number of people leaving. So I take all of those things as positive. But the net increase was only a few hundred over that year, and it needs to be bigger to fill in the gaps that have been created over the last few years where exits have exceeded inflow. There's a whole bunch of factors that will have played a part in that. Some of it is the financial retention incentives, some of it will be the pay rises, some of it will be for example, the defence housing strategy. Some of it is about greater flexibility, allowing our personnel to extend their services who want to. All of those add up to delivering the shift in position that you've described. I actually saw Rick Haythornthwaite last week to catch up with him because I was involved in his report. And effectively, his recommendations form the basis of the chapter in the Strategic Defence Review on people, and that is what we're driving at. You'll recall that Rick's report had, I think, 62 recommendations. That's a lot to get our arms around, so trying to focus the work as part of SDR delivery is focusing down on those things that are going to make the most difference in the short term. Part of that is about recruitment and retention, speeding that up and improving our retention numbers, and then the other part is really about providing that flexibility of service to ensure that we keep people in for as long as possible.